He was born with a gift that the world never gave him a name for. He simply felt everything.
While others moved through the world freely, his mind was already reading what no one said aloud. In every room he entered, he could feel the invisible tension that others had not yet noticed or named. A simple hello from a stranger carried 10 unspoken questions he could not stop himself from hearing. He sat in silence while 1,000 invisible conversations played out inside the walls of his restless, searching mind. The questions never stopped arriving, each one dragging behind it a dozen others he could not release. He could not simply accept a kind gesture. Every smile became a question he needed to decode and verify. Even in moments of beauty, a part of him stood apart, watching instead of truly living. The weight of all he perceived pressed him downward, curse, not in defeat, but in the quiet exhaustion of carrying too much. He watched himself from the inside and the outside at once. He absorbed the grief of others so completely that by nightfall, the sorrow felt entirely and truly his own. When they all went home lighter, he remained, still holding what was never truly his burden to bear.
His body joined the noise, translating every heartbeat, every breath, into signals that warned of danger that was not there.
The emergency alarm in his mind kept running always, long after the original danger had already passed and gone. He planned for every possible pain, mapping the disasters that had not arrived yet, preparing for the ones that never would.
He stood at the edge of every decision, calculating the fall long before he dared to take the step.
Somewhere beneath all the noise, there was still a quiet place inside him, small, warm, and waiting to be found.
The first step was not becoming less aware. It was learning to carry awareness without letting it consume him entirely.
He did not know where the path would lead soon, but for the first time, he chose to walk it anyway. He was still learning, still searching, but at last, he had stopped fighting the one truth. In a room full of voices, he heard not just the words being spoken, but everything deliberately left unsaid. He always found himself drifting to the edges, close enough to belong, too aware to fully stay. Time moved differently for him, each second carrying the full weight of every possible thing it might mean.
The mind that saw everything clearly was also the mind that could not stop seeing fearant, even when seeing brought him pain.
He longed for true connection, but something inside him always hesitated just before the final distance was closed. He stood at every door of possibility corning, aware of all that waited beyond, yet afraid to simply open it.
He lay still and let the sky be enormous, practicing the forgotten art of simply allowing himself to rest.
He was learning that not every silence needed filling, and not every word spoken required an answer from deep within him. He was not yet free from the weight he carried as Amy, but today, the walk itself felt a little less difficult.
He was beginning to see himself not as broken, but as someone who had simply been carrying far too much.
He stopped running from the difficult feelings for her, and discovered that standing still inside a storm did not destroy him. He found that putting words on paper gave his restless thoughts somewhere to land, and finally, somewhere to stay. In the presence of someone who needed him fully, he discovered that his awareness could become a gift rather than a prison.
He closed his eyes and, for the first time, allowed the silence to simply exist. He finally saw how far he had already come with every version of himself that had survived what once seemed unsurvivable.
He released what was never his to hold throne, and felt the profound, unfamiliar lightness of finally letting go. He was learning to simply be among people, Sue, without the weight of reading every room before entering it. He walked beneath the same stars as everyone else, Bulle, but But now he allowed himself to simply look up and wonder.
He returned to the edge where fear had once held him concern, and this time, he stood there without needing to step back.
He did not have all the answers, but he had finally stopped needing them before he was willing to move forward. The world never stopped sending its signals toward him of enough, but he was learning which ones truly deserved his full attention.
He discovered that stillness was not emptiness for us. It was the place where his mind finally had permission to breathe.
Some mornings he simply stood in the light, asking nothing from it, requiring nothing more than its quiet presence. He was learning that real companionship did not require analysis. Sometimes two people simply walked together, and that was more than enough. He had lived through each of those moments, and even the painful ones had made him someone worth becoming. He had spent years running from the quiet, and now he was finally beginning to understand what it was offering him. He had learned the difference between holding someone's pain for them, and simply standing beside them inside it. He was beginning to recognize something kind and familiar in his own reflection, something he had long refused to acknowledge or accept. For the first time in years, he was not running away from something. He was running toward a life he had chosen. Halfway through the journey, he paused and realized that the person he had been searching for had been standing here all along. He was no longer the observer standing outside the warmth. He had quietly, finally. He had once hidden from every storm. Now he stood in the rain and let it mean nothing more than rain. Growth did not announce itself loudly. It arrived quietly, in the smallest moments he had finally learned to notice. The very awareness that had once isolated him was now the thing that allowed him to reach others in ways no one else could. Every threshold he crossed now felt like a choice, not a trap, and that single shift changed everything for him. He found something deeply reassuring in the presence of things that had been standing long before his worries ever began. He had spent so many nights dreading tomorrow. Tonight he simply watched the stars and let tomorrow wait. His awareness had always made him see others clearly, and now he finally used that gift to lift someone else toward the light.
The road behind him was long and heavy, but the one ahead felt different now, lighter in a way he could not yet name.
He was not finished, not even close, Blade. But he had found the one thing that made. He looked at his own reflection without judgment for the first time, and found someone worthy of the life ahead.
From higher ground, everything that had once seemed overwhelming now appeared manageable, even quietly, surprisingly beautiful.
He stopped waiting for permission to belong to Billy, and discovered the door had never actually been closed against him. He wrote not to analyze or to solve, but simply to give the truth inside him somewhere honest and safe to live.
He had spent years making himself smaller to fit inside the fear. Today, he allowed himself to take up his rightful space.
He had learned to receive kindness without immediately questioning the price, and that alone changed the shape of his days.
He no longer needed the storm to stop before he moved. He had learned to walk through it without losing himself. He made peace with the version of himself that had suffered Hausen, recognizing that survival itself had been an act of quiet courage.
He had always been drawn to light for light, and was only now beginning to realize he had been carrying some all along. For the first time in his life, he ran not to escape, but because running itself felt like pure and honest joy. He was learning to let beautiful things simply be beautiful goths, without reaching for them, without fearing the moment they would end. He turned the handle he had stood before for so long, and found the room on the other side waiting, exactly as he hoped. He spoke his truth quietly and without apology, and discovered that being heard felt nothing like he had feared it would.
He needed to feel something solid beneath his hands, to remind himself the ground had never truly left him.
He paused in the middle of the crossing bramble, not from fear this time, but simply to appreciate how far he had come. He sat with the warmth instead of studying it right, and for one still, golden evening, that was more than enough for him.
He stood in the open wind and felt it move through him, carrying away what no longer deserved to remain.
He told the child what no one had ever told him, Kat, that being deeply sensitive was never something to be ashamed of or fixed. Without ever trying to lead, he had become someone others naturally turned toward, because he knew how to truly see them.
He watched the day end without trying to hold it, and in letting go, he found a peace he had long forgotten.
He returned to the same room, the plumbing, and realized the only thing that had truly changed was the way he chose to stand inside it.
He was learning to notice beauty without needing to understand it, Race, to let it simply pass through him like warm light.
He found comfort in the knowledge that others had walked through the same darkness cumbrance and had found their way back to light.
He watched it cross the sky without making a wish show.
For the first time, he felt no desperate need to ask for something more. He placed his hands over his own heart, and for the very first time, he did not find it necessary to apologize for it. At the edge where fear had once rooted him to Stellies, he finally took the step that belonged to no one else but him.
He tended what was small and fragile time, knowing that the most enduring things always begin this quietly and this humbly.
He no longer needed to be alone to feel safe. He had learned that his presence was something the world genuinely had room for. He looked back at every version of himself that had struggled and offered each one the compassion they had never been given. He stood beside the next generation all, silently showing them that their depth was a gift, not a burden to be carried alone. He stretched out his hand to catch something fragile and fleeting to win, and this time, he did it simply for the joy. He left space on the wall for what had not yet happened, learning at last to welcome the unwritten chapters still ahead.
In the silence he had once feared most, he discovered the rest he had been searching for his entire exhausted life. He greeted the person in the water with kindness, the same kindness he had always been so willing to offer everyone else.
He had found what he had always been looking for, not in a place or a destination, but in the people willing to walk beside him.
He opened himself to the enormity of the universe probe, and finally stopped needing to carry it all inside his own chest.
The light at the end of the path had always been there. He simply needed to believe it was meant for someone like him. He had arrived, Caveland, not at an ending, not at perfection, Twitty, but at himself, standing quiet.
If you saw yourself somewhere in this story, Terry, know that what you carry is not a flaw. It is the proof of how deeply you live.
He walked forward into a life no longer defined by what he feared pain,